Welcome to this explainer. Okay, picture this. Imagine a company that started out as just a tiny, humble office in Mississippi, built by a guy who literally used to deliver milk. Now, imagine that exact same company ballooning into a $180 billion titan, only to completely collapse into dust in a matter of weeks. I know, it sounds exactly like a Hollywood script, but this is the very real, very dark story of WorldCom. $180 billion. I mean, just let that number sink in for a second. At its absolute peak, that was WorldCom's valuation. They weren't just participating in the late 90s telecom boom, they were completely dominating it, handling a massive chunk of all global internet traffic. For investors back then, this was the golden goose. It was the centerpiece of so many pension funds and everyday retirement accounts. If you were in the market, you absolutely had to have a piece of WorldCom.
But here is the crazy part. Underneath that incredibly shiny exterior, the whole empire was a total mirage. It was built on a phantom number, over $11 billion. That's how much in completely fabricated fake accounting entries management had cooked up to keep the stock price soaring. At the time, this was the absolute largest corporate fraud in U.S. history. So how on earth did they pull off a deception of this massive scale?
Section 1. The Acquisition Machine.
Okay, so how did they grow so fast? Well, it wasn't by innovating or building new tech. It all started with that former milk delivery driver, Bernard Ebbers, who brought a massive appetite for risk to his startup, LDDS. Their entire strategy relied on a totally unsustainable acquisition cycle. It went like this: hype up the stock on growth promises, use that inflated stock as currency to just swallow up other companies, report the newly combined revenue to boost the stock price even higher, and then repeat the whole thing. It was basically a giant snowball rolling downhill, just getting bigger by eating everything in its path.
And this appetite for buyouts was just completely unprecedented. From a little coffee shop startup in 1983, they spent the next 2 decades devouring over 60 different companies. This wild strategy eventually peaked in 1998 with a jaw-dropping $37 billion buyout of MCI. And get this, MCI was actually way larger than WorldCom at the time. The small fish literally swallowed a whale and turned Ebbers' startup into an absolute Wall Street giant.
Section 2. When the music stopped.
But, every snowball eventually hits a wall, right? WorldCom's fundamental fatal flaw was that their model required continuous, massive growth at literally any cost. But in the early 2000s, extreme financial market pressures really started to close in. The dot-com bubble burst, the telecom market got way too saturated, and prices just plummeted. Then, the real fatal blow. Regulators actually stepped in and blocked their monster $129 billion merger with Sprint. So, without a shiny new company to absorb and hide behind, WorldCom's real underlying revenue growth just abruptly flatlined.
So suddenly, management is totally trapped. The financial markets are breathing down their necks, demanding that relentless quarterly growth they'd been spoon-fed for years. They faced a really brutal dilemma. Do they tell Wall Street the truth, that the acquisition machine is dead and profits are shrinking, or do they just fake the numbers to keep the stock price artificially pumped up? Well, we all know which path they went down.
Section 3. The $11 billion accounting trick.
Okay, so how exactly do you hide $11 billion? The mechanical execution of this crime was orchestrated by their brilliant, award-winning CFO, Scott Sullivan, and he exploited a shockingly simple loophole. Look, in accounting, day-to-day operating expenses, like paying fees to use other telecom networks, are supposed to be deducted from your profits immediately. But capital expenditures, like buying a building, have their costs spread out over many years. WorldCom was paying huge daily fees to other networks. Sullivan simply ordered his team to illegally take those massive everyday network fees and reclassify them as long-term capital expenditures.
Literally, with just a single stroke of a pen, billions of dollars in immediate expenses just vanished from the current year's books. They magically turned into phantom long-term assets. By not deducting those huge expenses from their current revenue, they massively artificially inflated their profits. They made a profoundly sick, bleeding company look incredibly healthy to desperate investors who just didn't know any better.
And, actually, they didn't even stop there. They also used a second trick, which accountants call dipping into cookie jar reserves. These were financial reserves set aside in the past for emergencies. WorldCom management improperly reached right into this cookie jar and just dumped that money into their current quarterly revenue. Between the phantom assets and the cookie jar, they fabricated the exact dazzling numbers that Wall Street was demanding.
Now you're probably asking, why go to such extreme, illegal lengths? This massive conspiracy was driven intensely from the top down. CEO Bernard Ebbers applied relentless pressure to hit those Wall Street targets. But perhaps the most damning part of this whole financial pressure cooker was a deeply personal one. Ebbers held over $400 million in personal loans, and they were all collateralized by his own WorldCom stock. If that share price dropped, the CEO would be personally bankrupted. It was just a glaring, massive conflict of interest that overrode all basic integrity.
Section 4. Exposing the fraud.
Here's the truly wild part about all of this. It wasn't the SEC or some genius Wall Street analyst who caught them. The hero of our story is an internal employee named Cynthia Cooper, the vice president of internal audit. Her department normally just handled routine operational stuff. But she and her small team started noticing numbers that just made absolutely no sense. Massive items classified in totally illogical ways. When she started asking questions, CFO Scott Sullivan fiercely resisted, literally ordering her team to delay their investigations.
But she absolutely refused to back down. Working late into the night, totally in secret and terrified of being fired, her team gathered the explosive evidence of the misclassified billions. She boldly bypassed the executives entirely and presented her findings directly to the board's audit committee. She shattered the illusion once and for all, and for her extraordinary bravery, she was named one of Time magazine's Persons of the Year. She really proved that a single person with enough courage can absolutely bring down an empire built on lies.
Section 5. Legacy and Lessons Learned.
The fallout was just catastrophic. In June 2002, WorldCom announced the accounting errors, and by July, they filed for bankruptcy. With over $107 billion in assets, it was the largest bankruptcy in U.S. history at the time. That golden stock plunged to basically zero. Tens of thousands of hardworking employees lost their jobs overnight. And honestly, the worst part? Ordinary people, pensioners, and everyday savers who had trusted this company watched their life savings completely evaporate.
People were absolutely furious. And this time, justice actually came for the guys at the top. Bernard Ebbers tried to claim he didn't know anything about the accounting tricks, but the jury was not buying it. He got 25 years in federal prison. Scott Sullivan, the architect of the whole thing, cooperated with prosecutors and got 5 years. Ebbers spent many years behind bars before being released for health reasons in late 2019, and he passed away shortly after.
Now, this disaster, coming right on the heels of Enron, by the way, it completely forced an overhaul of American financial oversight. It led directly to the Sarbanes-Oxley Act of 2002. This incredibly strict law totally changed the game. CEOs and CFOs now have to personally sign off on the accuracy of their financial statements under threat of criminal liability. They can't just lie to investors and claim ignorance anymore.
So, what's the big takeaway from this explainer? It really comes down to the fatal flaw in their DNA. Growth built purely on endless acquisitions without creating real underlying value is just a fragile illusion. WorldCom was a total house of cards. When your entire survival relies solely on buying up other companies just to look successful, you aren't really a business. You're a ticking time bomb, just waiting for the music to stop.
And it really perfectly illustrates the deadly impact of external financial market pressures. Management was pushed right over the edge by that relentless need to meet Wall Street's impossible expectations. It proves for sure that when an obsession with stock price overrides basic integrity and when personal financial conflicts cloud your judgment, disaster isn't just possible, it's completely inevitable.
It really makes you appreciate transparency and oversight, doesn't it? Thank you so much for joining me for this breakdown of the WorldCom collapse. I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Considering all the corporate disasters we've seen throughout history, which financial scandal shocks you the absolute most and why?